Okay, we're ready. Okay. Welcome to the first virtual presentation of our speakers from the Osterville Men's Club. Today, Bill Higgins, who is the retired sports editor of the Cape Cod Times, and because he's retired, it gives him a lot more time to golf. He says not very well. He's still trying to break 80. Fish, not very well, but the scenery is nice. I share that with you. Exercise, mostly walking these days while listening to audiobooks and podcasts and enjoying his 4 young grandkids, 2 that are in New Jersey and 2 that are here on the Cape. I guess, unfortunately, his son and daughter are both married to New York fans, so his challenge is to get the young ones into Boston fans. I'm optimistic, he says. I've been married to a Yankees fan for nearly 40 years, God bless, and still managed to raise my kids as Boston fans. So he retired nearly 4 years ago after more than 40 years as a journalist, and the itch still hasn't gone away, so he satisfies his creative urges contributing to the Cape Cod Times and several magazines. He's still a big sports fan, and one of the benefits of having more time is that I can enjoy watching more late games and then sleep in, though I rarely do. COVID-19 has certainly turned all of our lives upside down, but fortunately, everyone in my family and circle is healthy. I'm trying to make the best of a tough situation by staying positive and keeping a positive outlook with regard to his physical and emotional health. And Bill, I think we all share those thoughts with you. This is a very trying time. So I want to thank you for agreeing to present today to the Osterville Men's Club. And I also want to keep in the tradition of these introductions. And I want to share a little anecdote or two. The Hall of Fame great Alex Karras once said that he went to Iowa, but he didn't graduate. But he said, however, I was only there for 2 terms, Truman's and Eisenhower's. And then Jim Harbaugh, the Michigan head coach, once said before a game that this week I'm only going to dress half the team. The other half is going to have to dress themselves. And then Ohio State's head coach, Urban Meyer, once said that in a post-game press conference that about one of his players, he doesn't know the meaning of the word fear. In fact, I've seen his grades, and I don't think he knows the meaning of a lot of words. So, anyway, I could go on, but I won't. Anyway, so without further ado, here's Bill Higgins. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually, I guess. This is certainly a new world for me. I think, as I mentioned, I grew up on an old-fashioned Royal typewriter, banging on keys. And I thought it was quite a transition to master the computer keyboard. So now that I'm on a Zoom meeting, you know, I feel like I've joined the 21st century. I have had some experience with FaceTime, keeping in touch with our grandchildren in New Jersey and my grandchildren in Sandwich. So we exchanged some FaceTime things, but I have to give a big assist to my wife being able to execute some of that. So, but I think we're here, and I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And unfortunately, we're not physically together, but sooner, you know, rather than later, I hope if we can, you know, get through all this challenging COVID that we're all trying to cope with. But fortunately, in my world, when COVID struck in, I guess, mid-March is when it really accelerated. I happened to be in Florida at the time, actually spending my first, well, I retired, as I said, 4 years ago, and for a few years we were thinking of trying to get out of here during the winter and try to enjoy some warm weather until the spring returns, such as it is on Cape Cod. And finally this year we pulled it off and spent a month in St. Petersburg, Florida, kind of sight unseen. We lucked into a nice condominium, and we were all set to enjoy a pleasant month, and it was pleasant. But then 2 weeks into it, kind of the world turned upside down, and we had the challenge of what do we do? Do we kind of ride it out in Florida? Do we get in the car and drive home and hold our breath that, just pumping gas or staying in a hotel is going to put us in a precarious situation? And I was of the mind that, if I'm going to get sick or I'm going to run into some kind of calamity, I'd rather be home around family and friends than be in some place where nobody knew who I was. But my wife convinced me that, well, we can be as comfortable in Florida as we can be uncomfortable on the Cape in March with the weather. So why don't we just kind of sit tight and quarantine, basically? And that's what we did. So, and then we drove home with just one night stop in early April, and fortunately made it safely. And then, like all the rest of us, kind of just hunkered down throughout the spring and summer. But losing sports actually was kind of a blessing in disguise, I guess, for me. Sports is my whole life. It was professionally and it is personally. But with no games going on, all the leagues shut down in the spring training shut down, so there was no baseball. Golf, which is kind of my favorite sport these days, shut down. So I was kind of, I was like, well, what do I do at night? So actually I couldn't go out. I like socially being out with people. I like, going out with friends and my brother, play a little golf and maybe have a beverage afterwards and just, enjoy each other's company. It's the camaraderie that I enjoy the most. But that wasn't possible either because we couldn't go anywhere. So I actually kind of reintroduced myself to my wife, I guess, in some ways, and found out that, 39 and a half years of marriage will continue to work. So we shared time, watching Netflix, and, again, she technically figured out how to get me onto some of these alternative stations other than ESPN and, the Golf Channel. So, and as I said, I think in my introduction, I used to be a runner until, back and knees and hips started, bothering me. It's not a good activity when you have those kinds of issues. So I've kind of reluctantly given up some of the jogging. I shouldn't say I was a runner. I was a plodder and a jogger more than anything, but I like the activity. But now I've kind of transitioned into more walking. But it's been great, actually. I enjoy looking forward to my afternoon walks. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to some audio books. And so it's just been mentally and physically beneficial. And then so slowly but surely, sports has come back into all of our lives. And fortunately, we need it. I can only talk to my wife so often, and sometimes I get into political discussions and we tend to maybe be on the wrong side of the fence when it comes to some of those issues. So that's not always a healthy discussion. So, but sports, is kind of an outlet for all of us. And the interesting part of it all is that they all kind of started up at the same time. And so we've got, basketball going on in the summertime, hockey going on in the summertime, which was strange, baseball in a much, weirder, stranger environment with a 60-game season and at times 7-inning doubleheaders. Golf slowly came back, and golf I thought was always the one activity that might be able to manage through this coronavirus time because you're outdoors in the arena, you're spread out. Typically, certainly the way I play the game, I'm spread out because I'm in the woods more than I am in the fairways. So I thought that was the sport, that could manage this. And, to their credit, all the leagues have managed things pretty well. Although just this week now we're seeing the NFL is having, a few cases pop up. Baseball certainly had some cases pop up. Basketball being in the bubble in Orlando, I think managed it really well. I don't think they had any problems at all. In hockey in Canada, they split their bubbles between Edmonton and Toronto, and I think they had very few, if any, problems. So off the ice and off the courts and the fields, I think we're doing okay with that. Selfishly, as a sports fan, it gives me something to watch at night. It gives me something to read about in the morning and pay attention to. When it comes to our own Boston teams, some good news and some bad. You know, the Bruins were a disappointment in the playoffs. Tuukka Rask, for personal reasons, decided that he had to leave the team and be home with his family, and I certainly respect that. This is definitely a trying time, and people's health and people's families are far more important than anything else. So, but losing your best goaltender, I think, was a problem.
Okay.
I don't know.
Bill, excuse me. Just for purposes of today, I'm going to interject. But I wanted to ask you a question. I've
Sure.
written a couple of questions for myself.
Okay.
How did you become a sports writer? If you could tell us a little bit about that, or you know, it's just a hypothetical question. So you know,
Sure.
for purposes of the
Sure.
recording, and then what writers were an influence on your career and on your style or your approach to writing?
Okay. Try to keep them both short if I can. I tend to ramble.
Yeah.
Maybe you just
Okay.
saw. But, you know, my desire to be a writer really goes back to when I was a young boy. I grew up on the Cape in Harwich, had an older brother who was a good athlete in high school. In our school, it was a small school in Harwich, so we just played soccer, basketball, and baseball with the 3 different seasons. We didn't have football or hockey or anything like that, but he was a very good 3-sport athlete. He's about 5 or 6 years older than I am. And for whatever reason, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My father always told me, you have 2 eyes, you know, and 1 mouth, and you should, you know, listen. I mean, 2 ears, I'm sorry, 2 ears and 1 mouth. And you should listen twice as much as you talk. And in a family of 5, in an Irish Catholic family, it was a loud, boisterous house. And I guess being the youngest of 5, I was a good listener. And I think that helped me become a writer. But I always had a desire to tell stories. My brother would play his games, and they used to be on the radio, or occasionally I would maybe go to them, and I would, for whatever reason, I'd come home and I would just write little stories about what I saw. And I always kind of, I mean, I wasn't a journalist because I didn't tell the truth all the time. And so, but I always made him the star of the team, and his team always won, because that made me feel good. He was good. He wasn't always the star of the team, and his teams often won. But so it just grew from there. In high school, I did some writing for the little student newspaper we had. There was a weekly newspaper in Chatham, the Chatham Chronicle, that asked me, because I enjoyed sports and I enjoyed writing, if I would write a weekly high school recap of Harwich High School sports, which kind of, I guess, was my first published opportunity. From there, my high school coach and athletic director put me in touch with the sports editor at the Cape Cod Times, who gave me the opportunity to give them information on our high school team when they played games, basketball specifically. And from there, after high school, he gave me the opportunity to actually come in the office and write some stories, and they were god awful. But I had some mentors there that basically taught me how to write. They taught me how to use a dictionary, how to spell. And I've always equated writing to a craft like carpentry or electricians or plumbing. It's a craft that you can learn if you practice it. And practicing it, which answers your second question, I read a lot, mainly newspapers in the sports section. The Boston Globe. I loved reading Ray Fitzgerald, who was an old-time columnist for the Globe. Lee Montville was a writer that I always admired his style. Peter Gammons, who still is a great baseball writer. I loved, baseball was my favorite sport back then, so I read a lot of that. And I just read and read and read. And I think I absorbed almost maybe through osmosis a style of writing. And hopefully I developed my own voice and my own style. But I think early on I probably copied styles. And I don't think it was plagiarism, but you absorb how other people sort of phrase things and tell stories. And it just grew from there. It's a craft that I, have just practiced for more than 40 years. And I still read a lot. I love reading great writing, whether it's sports or otherwise. And I think inherently when I read it, I just admire how people can string words together to make compelling stories, visual stories. And that kind of, it's a short answer, maybe not a short answer, but that's really how I just have always had a love of telling stories. And that got me into the business.
That's great. And that is a great story in and of itself too. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much for sharing all this with us. It's been a very entertaining and informative meeting with you here today. So, Bill, I want to thank you once again for spending your time and your knowledge and yourself in this virtual socialization that we're going through right now. So anyway, again, thank you so much. So we'd like to make this actually an annual event to have you talk to the OMC, every year, because you're certainly one of the most well-attended meetings, and the members of the club really enjoy hearing from you. So again, thank you.
Well, thank